Everyone, and thank you for joining today's virtual symposium session. My name is Brittany Cunningham, and I'm an assistant director for CNA Center for Justice Research and Innovation and the co-director of the Project on American Justice. I'd like to go over a few helpful tips as we begin today's session. Please keep your phones or computer audio on mute to avoid background noise. The session is being recorded so you and others may view it later on our website. If you'd like to ask a question of the panelists, please use the chat function and direct your questions to the host. You can send a question at any time throughout the session. To access the chat function, if you're using your computer, refer to the button to refer to the bottom center of your screen. If you're using your mobile device, your chat function is at the top right corner of your screen. Please edit your display name by hovering over your name, clicking more, choosing the rename option, and changing your screen name to reflect your full name and agency, so we and others may know who you are and where you're from. After the symposium, there will be an opportunity to evaluate it. Please do provide us your input on this and other sessions as it helps us improve for future events. Thank you. Please reach out to the chat function if you have any questions throughout the session or throughout the virtual symposium. And now I'll pass it over to Damon Mosler, a Project on American Justice SME and the retired Deputy District Attorney from the San Diego County District Attorney's Office, to begin the session. Damon?
Thank you, Brittany. I worked as a Deputy District Attorney for nearly 30 years in San Diego County, serving as Chief of our Major Narcotics, our Special Operations, and later our Economic Crimes divisions, as well as an embedded liaison to our law enforcement departments. That led me to work closely with law enforcement in a variety of capacities. Over that time, I became a subject matter expert on body cameras and digital evidence management. I started working with CNA on the body-worn camera policy and improvement program in 2015. Over time, I became involved in Justice Reinvestment Initiative, Public Safety Partnership, Project Safe Neighborhood, and more recently, 2 other projects that are part of today's presentation: the Project on American Justice and the Prosecution Research Collaborative. Both of these projects look to improve the criminal justice system now and in the coming years. Our first presenters will be Caitlin Maloney and Amanda Bruner. They're presenting on unlocking the power of crime analysis as a force multiplier. Police departments across the country are adapting to civilization in more positions than historical, clerical, secretarial, dispatch, and vehicle maintenance support. These newer roles include crime analysis. Due to the current staffing shortages in many police departments, crime analysis can become a force multiplier, aiding command staff in making patrol deployment decisions, assisting with investigations, and providing actionable intelligence to line officers. This presentation reviews the definition of crime analysis, provides a brief overview of the professionalization of the role, and delves into how these analysts can assist their agencies. Next, we'll hear from Jennifer Lafferty, Kate Kanuski, and Alyssa Gambarella, who will present on systemic literature review research on prosecutors. In 2021, the National District Attorneys Association was awarded a grant from the United States Department of Justice, Office of Justice Programs, and the Bureau of Justice Assistance. The award was entitled Prosecution Research Collaborative. This award reinforces the Department of Justice's commitment to supporting our nation's prosecutors and the key role they play in the criminal justice system. With this award, NDAA subcontracted with CNA Center for Justice Research Innovation. As a part of the Prosecution Research Collaborative's efforts to support prosecutors in their violent crime reduction efforts, they conducted a scan of empirical research. The goal of the review was to determine where there was empirical research relating to prosecutorial strategies and to note where there were gaps in the empirical research regarding effective and unbiased prosecutorial strategies. The team aimed to identify innovative, evidence-based programming and emerging trends in the prosecutorial profession that could be observed and replicated by other offices. The literature review focused on 3 overarching topics. 1, prosecutorial autonomy and decision-making. 2, prosecutorial challenges and resource issues. And finally, community-based approaches to violent crime reduction. The speakers will give a brief overview of their findings to date. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Caitlin and Amanda to talk about crime analysis as a force multiplier.
Thank you, Damon. My name is Caitlin Maloney, and I'm here with Amanda Bruner today. We are in the same room because we are actually at a crime analysis conference this week. So this fits in really well with our presentation. A little background on myself. I currently serve as an associate research analyst with CNA. I am the project manager of our crime analyst in residency program, as well as serving on an analyst as a variety of other training and technical assistance grants. Before joining CNA, I was a crime analyst in New York State for 3 years, and I worked in 2 different police departments, as well as 2 of the fusion centers in New York State.
And my name is Amanda Bruner. I am also an associate research analyst for CNA and work alongside Caitlin on the crime analyst in residence program. Before joining CNA, I was a crime analyst for the Matthews Police Department, as well as a part-time crime analyst for the Michigan State University Police Department. And I also teach crime analysis for Radford University and UNC Charlotte.
Could you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So the broader topic of civilianization within crime analysis. In recent years, there has been, obviously, as many of you know, social unrest and asks of police reform within law enforcement. There are many individuals who want to still be a part of public safety and be a part of law enforcement as a whole, but they don't want to wear the badge. So this has caused for the departments to civilianize more roles. This includes dispatcher, public information officers, crime analysts, crime scene technicians, records clerk, parking enforcement, and mental health and victim advocates, just to name a few. In these roles, you can teach people how to extract information from record systems. PIOs can be former journalists or media relation liaisons, crime analysts, which we'll talk today about. And these roles as civilianization gives officers more time to go to calls that they need to and frees up time to get them to places faster, especially with staffing shortages. Next slide, please. So on the topic of staffing shortages, as many departments are facing throughout the country, agencies are losing officers faster than they're able to hire new ones. These 2 graphs that we have on the slides are PERF membership surveys regarding sworn officers and total resignations. As you see on the left, there's been a steady decrease of overall officers for the 187 entities that answered the survey. And on the right, you can see the steady increase of sworn resignations from the 177 survey respondents. Next slide, please. So we have a poll question for all of you. Is the poll question working?
Nope, sorry about
Do we have
Give us
Helena?
1 second and we'll try to see if we can get the poll question up. Sorry about that, Caitlin and Amanda.
That's all right, thank you.
There we go.
Thank you. So you guys just want to take a moment and answer this poll question for us, just so we can see your knowledge about crime analysis before we move forward.
All right, so based on the responses, the majority of you all believe that you know some of the common tasks that they perform, but there does look like we can kind of dive into this a little bit more as a review. All right, we can go to the next slide. So with that, what is crime analysis? So crime analysis is meant to support criminal investigations, prosecution, patrol activities, and so on. Crime analysts support this through intelligence analysis, tactical, strategic, and administrative crime analysis that we will talk about here in a few minutes. Crime analysis employs a variety of quantitative and qualitative techniques. So this essentially relates to the concept that there are both quantitative and qualitative variables present on an incident report. And so analysts will code these in order to create and produce those analytical products. And then crime analysis also includes the analysis of crime, criminals, crime victims, disorder, quality of life issues, traffic issues, and internal police operations. The focus here is that crime analysts analyze both internal and external police data in order to produce those comprehensive products. Next slide, please. So the role of a crime analyst is to provide actionable information to command and supervisory staff for the deployment of personnel and the allocation of resources. Products can be both actionable or evaluation oriented. Those products that are action oriented, they lead to a range of specific evidence-based responses. The concept here rests on the idea that dispatch is to calls for service as crime analysis is to products. What that means is that dispatch puts out to an officer where an incident has occurred and the officer responds. The goal is for crime analysis to operate in a similar manner, where the analyst would be producing products that then the sworn personnel are responding to engage in proactive crime reduction. Crime analysts often operate as the voice of the chief and use agency goals set by the chief and executive staff to dictate the day-to-day crime reduction efforts of the entire organization using specific analytical products. Crime analysts do not necessarily decide what is important, but provide the information to command and supervisory personnel to make those decisions. Crime analysts also assist operations personnel in developing crime suppression and prevention activities. They are oftentimes the experts on problem-solving techniques and situational crime prevention, and can also produce products that are evaluation-oriented that assess whether responses are effective. Ultimately, crime analysts act as a truth teller within an organization and establish what is working through ongoing monitoring of problems and evaluation statistics, and identify, analyze, and evaluate without regard for who is being assigned a problem. They are neutral and unbiased. And then obviously, crime analysts aid in the investigation of crime to apprehend suspects in clear cases by providing case support. Next slide, please. On the screen here are a variety of different ways that crime analysts help police agencies, and this is sourced from the International Association of Crime Analysts. Ultimately, they are the primary liaison to external agencies and engage in information sharing with both other members of the department and analysts from other agencies. Crime analysts are designed to support all units and analyze more than just incident reports. Next slide.
So how can your crime analyst be a force multiplier? Your crime analyst can find series, patterns, trends, and hotspots as they happen. They're your experts on your CAD and RMS system. They're in there every day reading reports, so they are able to spot patterns of locations, people, crimes, etc. They also help research and analyze long-term problems. Like Amanda said, they will not give you the solution. They will give you the information for command staff to plan for solutions. They can provide additional information to anyone on demand. Like I mentioned before, they know your CAD system, RMS system, front to back. And so if you need an answer, you can go to your crime analyst and get that answer. For an example, when I was a crime analyst, I had detectives come up to me and ask for a 30-minute turnaround time for a product because they knew that I could get it to them fast, and they knew that the information would be useful and actionable towards whatever meeting that they had. They also can assist you with developing and linking your local intelligence. As we all know, crime and criminals do not have jurisdictional boundaries, and the crimes that happen in your jurisdiction probably are happening elsewhere. Your crime analysts serve as liaisons with other crime analysts in the area. A lot of them have regional meetings, regional associations, etc., where this information is shared, and you can link these crimes together. And overall, they make your department look good. The products that a crime analyst can produce can be made to be public facing, to have on your website, or it could be products that you give to the chief, and the chief can use this information to present to the mayor or present to a community at any sort of event, and they have that information so the chief knows exactly what they're talking about. And in this day of staffing shortages, as we've mentioned before, one crime analyst can do a whole heck of a lot for your department in giving this information and making up for those staffing shortages. Next slide, please. So your crime analyst also serves as your main point of contact and liaison between all different units in a police department. They promote interagency communication. They touch all levels of the police department. They are going to roll calls and talking with your patrol officers about certain products and what they're seeing on the street. They're sitting in with the detective bureau and helping with investigations. They're also sitting in with command staff and the chief and figuring out what problems and the direction that the chief wants to go. So if anybody in your department knows something about what is going on, it is your crime analyst. They can assist on all these levels, and they can also assist in training your police department on crime analysis and crime analysis products. Next slide, please.
So as mentioned before, there are 4 types of crime analysis. Intelligence analysis is the analysis of data about people involved in crimes, particularly repeat offenders, repeat victims, and criminal organizations and networks. And it seeks to understand more about the context of the lives, jobs, activities, motives, and plans of those individuals and networks. So on the screen here, we have 4 different examples of crime analysis products that relate to intelligence analysis. In the upper left is an offender workup that we have developed that we use with agencies on a daily basis to collect information on wanted persons and targets. On the bottom left is a link chart that helps to explain a network of individuals and how they are connected. On the upper right is a timeline. This is a product that is oftentimes produced to assist with case support and prosecution. And on the bottom right explains a map of phone data where an analyst would map some of the information received from a carrier in order to place a suspect's phone in the area of a crime at a particular time. Next slide. Tactical crime analysis is the analysis of police data directed towards the short-term development of patrol and investigative priorities and the deployment of resources. And its subject areas include individual high-profile crimes, repeat incidents, and crime patterns with a specific focus on crime series. In the upper left here is a sample of a bulletin that a crime analyst might produce to assist in identifying a person of interest in relation to an incident. In the upper right is a repeat incident report that an analyst might produce to identify where calls for service are clustering in the short term. This is especially important when analyzing domestic disputes and disturbances to try to prevent aggravated assaults or homicides. And the bottom image is a screenshot from a pattern product that looks at a hot setting. So in this example, it was looking at a variety of different crimes that were occurring at similar locations within a few-week time period. Next slide. Strategic crime analysis is the analysis of data directed towards development and evaluation of long-term strategies, policies, and prevention techniques. Its subjects include long-term statistical trends, hotspots, and problems. Strategic analysis primarily focuses on problem locations, offenders, and areas, and all of these are each disproportionately responsible for crimes and calls for service. This includes temporal analysis and the long-term analysis of trends over time and examines the seasonality of crime. Next slide. Administrative crime analysis is analysis that is directed towards the administrative needs of a police agency, its government, and its community. This includes a variety of techniques and products performed both regularly and on request, and includes statistics, data printouts, maps, and charts. So here on the screen are a few different examples of administrative crime analysis products that analysts produce. So we have crime statistics. These can be produced bi-weekly, monthly, and so on, depending upon the needs of the agency. Evaluation graphs that look to evaluate the response efforts that an agency has employed. So this compares crime pre and post intervention in an agency. Accountability ensures that the agency is on track based on target goals for crime reduction. And on the bottom right is a map that shows the spatial distribution of crime within the jurisdiction. Next slide, please.
There is a lot of different technology that a crime analyst can use to assist you and your agency with whatever you may need. So first of all, as I mentioned before, they understand your CAD and RMS system. They are able to not only work within it, but they're able to extract data and pull it into other programs as well to get a better idea of what's going on. Crime analysts also have the ability to map and use mapping programs. A common one is the Esri Arc Pro platform, but there's a variety of other ones as well that crime analysts know how to use. Crime analysts also know how to use Microsoft products and not just the basics within your PowerPoint, Word, Excel, and Publisher, but they also are able to do if statements, analyze graphs, analyze data, put complete products together in Excel, and use extensions such as Node Excel, which can conduct network analysis and visualization packages. As Amanda mentioned before, crime analysts can also use programs such as CellHawk, which are cell phone analysis programs and assist detectives in investigations. I2 Analyst Notebook is an example of visual software for relationships between data entities. So these aren't just how people connect, but how phone numbers, how vehicles, how addresses connect to people if you are doing an extensive investigation. Visio and RF Flow are examples of softwares to create timelines and link charts, organizational charts, etc. And then some crime analysts that have a lot of experience can also do social network analysis, which is investigating social structures through the use of networks and graph theories. So there are free programs such as PAJ that a lot of police departments are using while they start to dabble in social network analysis. Next slide, please. So the profession as a whole. The profession of crime analysis has greatly expanded and has had more opportunities since the World Trade Center attacks in 2001, unfortunately. As we all know, there was a breakdown or lack of communication between federal, state, and local law enforcement partners. And with the growing technology and the need to share information, the crime analysis profession grew. There's more cameras, LPR, laptops, smartphones that have easy access to technology and great information for solving crimes, but somebody needs to be able to go through all that information and pull out what is needed. And this is where crime analysis come in. They also, as we mentioned before, they serve as your liaisons between local, state, and federal partners. Now, in every single state, there are regional fusion centers. There's at least one in every state, but I do believe that most states have more than one. For example, New York State has over 10 regional fusion centers that are the center of information sharing for law enforcement in the states. They serve local crime analysts, there's state analysts, HIDA, federal partners come in, there's people from the sheriff's office, usually from someone from the National Guard, and it all promotes information sharing. And this leads analysts to gain knowledge as they work through their daily tasks. But where do crime analysts come from? Crime analysts can come from a whole array of backgrounds. It can be previous law enforcement that still want to work within the police department, but not as a badge. You can also have people from records, dispatch, administrative clerks. They can transfer into the crime analysis realm, but we're also seeing an increase in degree programs specifically, and Amanda's going to talk about that in a little bit more. There's career advancement now for crime analysts. Many places have crime analysts 1 and 2. You can be a crime analyst supervisor, and you can also be a crime analyst and a director in some of these fusion centers. But that's where we are now. So where's crime analysis as a profession heading in the future? So now we're not only seeing crime analysts in law enforcement, but we're also seeing them in prosecution officers and correctional departments as well. For example, the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office, which is in Cleveland, Ohio, has their crime strategies unit, which consists of crime analysts, prosecutors, and paralegals that all work together to analyze and produce data to identify not only crime trends, but crime driving groups in the community. And they work together to not only arrest these people, but streamline the prosecution of them as well. But with that comes risks. What are the risks of the crime analyst profession moving forward when you see them moving out of law enforcement? The risks are now you're seeing them move into the private sector as well. And that's because there's more money and there is more opportunity for growth. Their title wouldn't be a crime analyst. They'd serve as a data analyst or something under that sort of umbrella, but they can use everything that they learn in law enforcement and move it over into the private sector. There's also the risk of being taken by the federal partners and moved through the ranks that way because there is a bit more of growth. So how do you prevent that in your agency? Make sure that your analyst knows that they are valuable for your agency and that they feel included with everything that you do. That's the best way to prevent it from happening. Next slide, please. But with all of this, it's really important that your department has buy-in from every single level of the department because crime analysts touch every single level of the department. If you don't have this whole approach of buy-in, the use of a crime analyst is not going to be used to the full potential. As you can see from the chart on the right, this is a generalization of where crime analysts fall within a police department. They're reporting to somebody who's reporting to somebody who's reporting to somebody who reports to the chief. But this buy-in comes from the chief or the sheriff. It needs to start at the top, but it does need to trickle all the way down. And the crime analyst needs to know everybody in the department at some level so that all departments know what the crime analyst can do. Next slide, please, which is another poll question for you all.
All right, so looking at the results, it is a little bit mixed across the board in regards to how many crime analysis associations exist in the US. The majority of you did all respond with 5. You can go to the next slide. So these are just a few. There are even more than this, but this is all that we could fit on the page. But these are a variety of different international and regional associations that promote crime analysis. So as you can see, there are dozens of crime analysis associations. The importance of these is that they help to professionalize the career. As we mentioned, we are currently at the International Association of Crime Analysts annual conference, and the goal is to provide training and opportunities at both the local and international level. These conferences also include certification opportunities for crime analysts and promote networking to advance the field. If you go to the next slide, please. And then as Caitlin touched on earlier, the field of crime analysis is becoming increasingly professionalized. So obviously there is no necessarily one way to become a crime analyst. You may start out as a dispatch, records, and admin assistant or so on. However, there are a variety of additional training programs and graduate certificates that are available. So these universities here on the screen are just representative of different ones that are offering specific programs in crime analysis. The idea here is that these courses are not just focusing on traditional criminal justice topics. They're looking at advanced statistics, data analytics, and computer science. So for example, some of the courses that I teach for some of these universities include practical applications. So they're building on traditional critical thinking projects and also applying that knowledge. So analysts are graduating with master's degrees in crime analysis and are able to immediately begin applying that information in their agencies and producing direct analytical products.
Next slide. That's it. Yep.
Awesome.
So we'll hold off on questions until the end, but I want to thank Amanda and Caitlin, and they'll be around after we hear from Jennifer, Kate, and Alyssa next on the prosecution research collaboration.
Thank you so much. And I just wanted to say thank you to everyone and for the opportunity to be here today to talk to y'all a little bit about this very exciting project. It's called the Prosecution Research Collaborative. And today we're going to talk to you about the systematic literature review that was conducted and some directions forward based upon the information that we found. So if we can please go to the first slide. Thank you. So this project is funded through the U.S. Bureau of Justice Assistance. Tammy Brown, who is a senior policy advisor and our grant manager for this particular project, unfortunately couldn't make it today, but she did ask me to express on behalf of BJA their commitment to improving the criminal justice system, as was stated earlier, and the reinforcement through this project to carry that out. And this project, as you'll hear, really supports prosecutorial efforts around violent crime reduction. So very exciting project. And we have 2 partner organizations working together on this, which is fantastic. The National District Attorneys Association and the Center for Justice Research and Innovation. We can go to the next slide, please, and we can introduce the team here. So my name is Alyssa Gambarella. I feel like I know a lot of familiar faces on here from the work that I've been doing in several of the grants. I am a director of education and engagement currently with NDAA. My background is in prosecution. I was a prosecutor for about 17 years in both New Jersey and a short time in New Mexico. And I'm just going to turn it over to my teammates here and just ask that they quickly introduce themselves.
Thanks very much, Alyssa. Dr. Kate Kanuski, so pleased to be here today with Alyssa from NDAA and my CNA colleagues, of course. Dr. Kate Kanuski, I'm a research analyst here at CNA in the Center for Justice Research and Innovation. Serve as an analyst on various projects, including as the advisor for the Greensboro, North Carolina Public Safety Partnership team. I've been at CNA for about 1 year now. Previously worked on finishing my doctoral program at George Mason University. I'm very, very fortunate to have worked on this project, the Prosecution Research Collaborative, really for my entire tenure here at CNA. So I've been really lucky to have been able to do that. And I'll hand it over to my colleague, Jen Lafferty.
Thanks, Kate. Hi, my name is Jen Lafferty. I'm a research scientist on the JRI's team. I've been with CNA for about 3.5 years now, and I'm the project director on the CNA side of this project. I'm very excited to be working with NDAA on this. I also have a background in prosecution. I worked as an attorney for a number of years before kind of shifting gears and getting focused on criminal justice research. We're excited to share all of our findings with you today.
Thank you so much. We have a really great partnership and team going here, and we're really excited about it. So as I said, this is a BJA funded program. And just to talk to you very quickly about kind of the goals and the objectives overall of the project, the goal, as you can see here, is really to work in partnership with prosecutors' offices who are experiencing an increase in violent crime, which is pretty much every prosecutor's office across the country, to identify current research and knowledge gaps regarding prosecutorial practices that improve public safety and build trust. So it's really working to support prosecutorial efforts in violent crime reduction through expanding the use of evidence-informed practice and to provide prosecutors with the knowledge, skill, and support they need to reduce violent crime or play their part in the reduction of violent crime and build trust within their communities. So some of the objectives are, as was stated earlier, to review the research that exists currently. So we wanted to know within kind of the areas of interest that we had, what exists out there relative to prosecutors, how they're making decisions, their efforts toward violent crime reduction. Based upon the research that we were able to find, our next objective really was to identify best practices for effective and unbiased crime reduction. We were hoping, and as you'll hear, continue to hope to identify areas for some future research, and then develop accessible resources for the field based upon our findings. If you can please advance to the next slide. So how we've gone about, or how we're starting to accomplish some of these objectives, is we're working with an advisory board. So we have worked to appoint and collaborate with an advisory board of cross-disciplinary experts. They're all over the country. We have 23 in total. And as you'll hear in just a second here, we're really hoping that the advisory board will be able to bring some practical context and boots on the ground experience behind the research findings or lack of findings that we have. So we're working to identify and review literature around prosecutorial efforts specifically. And I talked a little bit about the fact that we broke this into a couple of overarching topic areas. You'll hear a little bit more about that here in a second when I turn it over to my teammates. But essentially, we were looking big picture at prosecutorial autonomy and decision-making. So really trying to understand how it is that prosecutors are making decisions. Prosecutorial challenges and resource issues. We know much like law enforcement in general, we're having major problems in the field of prosecution with retention and recruitment, especially as we expand the use of digital evidence and case management systems, and really what type of resource issues and challenges are prosecutors' offices facing. And then finally, the larger topic of community-based approaches to violent crime reduction. So the goal is, once we identified and reviewed the literature to see what existed, it's to work, like I said, with that advisory board. We've broken out into subcommittees based upon their areas of expertise to hope that they can give some practical context to what we're seeing in the literature. And then the next step is to develop resources for the field based upon what it is that we found and our work with the subcommittees and the advisory board, and then provide some training and technical assistance, which we'll talk to you a little bit about at the end of the presentation. So if we can go on to the next slide, and I think I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Kate Knuski.
Thanks so much, Alyssa. I want to scope out a little bit and give folks some context by, what we mean by evidence-based prosecution, what we're hoping to accomplish and where we hope to go. It's really instructive to look at this parallel ideological project called evidence-based policing, right? And it's a term that's thrown around quite often, but it really wasn't until the late 90s that this becomes codified as sort of a named movement, right? It's in 1998 that Dr. Larry Sherman coins the phrase evidence-based policing. Shortly after that, the Campbell Corporation establishes their crime and justice group. If you're familiar with any of the Campbell's systematic reviews, which have very much become sort of these touchstones in evidence-based policing, they're the folks who are responsible for that. In 2008, George Mason University establishes the Center for Evidence-Based Crime Policy. And I'll shout out to my alma mater. I did just recently graduate from George Mason, and I was really fortunate during my time there to have worked for the Center for Evidence-Based Crime Policy. Again, really one of the prime movers in this movement of EBP. And then in 2009, shortly after that, the BJA launches their Smart Policing Initiative program, which is really focused on encouraging and supporting departments and organizations in being able to carry out the empirical research that informs evidence-based practices. So that's a little bit of an idea of when we think about evidence-based policing over the last 25 years, that's the progression that we've seen. Now, what we're hoping to do with this project is really start to drill down on evidence-based prosecution. Next slide, please. So the first thing that we want to do is figure out what's out there, right? The best way to do that is through a systematic literature review. And we have these 3 previously defined buckets. And we came up with very specific inclusion criteria for what we were going to consider research. It needed to be empirical research. And by that, of course, we mean observable, measurable phenomenon that sort of distinguishes it from a theory-based discussion, what you see very often in law review, right? We want actually the hard science about different aspects of prosecution. Everything needed to be written in English, based in the US. We looked at everything since 2012, so going on about 13 years now, 11 years now. And we wanted within those sources to have a really specified methodology so we could have a sense about how this research was conducted, so we can have a sense about how valid these results are. So that's things like when the data was collected, what type of data, who were the sample and respondents, collection methods, and then the analytic strategy, whether that be quantitative, qualitative, or mixed methods. Those are our inclusion criteria. Next slide, please. Again, we have these 3 main buckets: prosecutorial autonomy and decision-making, challenges and resource issues, community-based approaches to violent crime. And within each one of those buckets, we had a pretty specific set of subtopics for which we specifically wanted to find information for. And if we could just pop to the next slide really quickly and click for the animation. Thanks very much. So looking at, we want to make the sense of like the huge scope and also granularity of our search. We really cast like an incredibly wide net, a dauntingly wide net, as we came to find out, right? Kind of taking on finding research really in these huge domains of prosecution. So we have subtopics within subtopics within subtopics. This gives you an idea of sort of the keyword searches that we were doing just within intake procedures and charging and bail decisions. We're looking at all of these really granular issues. So again, this is casting like an extremely wide net. We wanted to have as holistic a view of what the research looks like out there that we possibly could. Next slide, please. So we'll have a little bit of audience participation here. How many sources of research, right? How many empirical pieces do folks think that we found? Going back to evidence-based policing a little bit to give some context. In 2020, these researchers, Engel et al., carry out a systematic review of empirical literature that had all these inclusion criteria that were really, really similar to ours. So this is very much sort of a parallel project, but it's looking at a very, very scoped in, focused topic, which is de-escalation training as far as reducing police use of force incidents. So again, this would be like a subtopic of a subtopic of a subtopic, very focused. Within that, they find 64 relevant searches. So think for a minute, if we're going to extrapolate that outwards, that we search for many subtopics of subtopics of subtopics in prosecution broadly. If they're finding 64 sources, how many sources do folks anticipate that we found? And we'll go ahead and pop that poll up if we can, please. Yeah, I'll give folks just a second to think about what we potentially may have found, and then we'll talk about our results a little bit. And Melissa and Heliana, whenever it's ready, we can pop the results up and go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, let's see, 0 to 99, 20, that's the largest. Okay, quite a few folks thinking 100 to 199. Okay, so fairly evenly spread. Let's go ahead and see the next slide. We found, drum roll please, 228 sources. So again, that seems like a large number. I want to make the point that this is vanishingly little research for how big a net we cast, right? If we were going to take that angle study, extrapolate it outwards, they found 64 sources. If we did, that same study extrapolated outwards to all of prosecution, you would have expected that we found thousands and thousands of sources if there was the same amount of policing literature out there as prosecutorial literature out there. There's clearly not. We found 228. And that was winnowed down from an initial capture of over 4,000 articles. So we do that, throw out that huge net, we bring in 4,000. There's quite a lot of noise within which you have to distinguish that signal. We end up winnowing it down all the way to 228 sources. As a side note, I'll say that Jen and I did a phenomenal amount of cajoling our co-workers into the office with the promise of coffee and donuts and all kinds of things to get this coding done. We did review each and every one of those 4,000 articles to see if they did truly meet our inclusion criteria. Through that process, we cut it down to 228 sources. Next slide, please. So, when we're looking at topics that did meet our research criteria, we'll see in this slide, it seems like there's quite a few different things that we did find research for. Of course, the caveat to this is that for many of these bullet points, we might have found 1 or 2 sources. So if we could click to the next slide really quickly. Within these topics that are highlighted are the ones that we found really any significant amount of research. So can we say that, experts in the field are really starting to learn about what these different topics look like as far as their evidence base? This is really what we're working with. Now, of course, we see like hints that the research is starting to evolve because we did find 1 or 2 sources for many of these topics. However, the research is really, really concentrated just within just a very small set of topics. And if we look at the next slide, the topics for which we didn't find any research is extensive. Right. And again, this is something that there's subtopics within subtopics. The things that we look at our keyword search, for which we found absolutely no research. We're looking at hundreds of keyword searches that yielded absolutely nothing. Right. So that really makes the point of, where we are as far as the evidence base looking at prosecution, but more importantly, where we need to go. There are these huge gaps that pertain to things that are really important. Witness protection, looking at caseload and the stressors that are put on prosecutors, technological integration, all these things that are really important. We just don't have an evidence base for right now. And I believe the next slide, I'm going to go ahead and send it to, yes, my wonderful colleague, Jen. She's going to talk a little bit more detail about some of our findings.
Yep, thanks, Kate. As Kate was kind of alluding to, we found most of the articles that we found were really, really clustered into the prosecutorial decision-making and autonomy section, our first kind of big bucket that we were looking at. And most of this focused on different decision-making points within prosecution. We did note that a lot of the research we found, there was a big disconnect between the empirical research and the everyday work of prosecutors. A lot of the research would take data such as sentencing data kind of at the end of the case and use the data points that were collected by the Sentencing Commission to try to extrapolate the prosecutorial decision-making process from the initial charging point. So we would use sentencing data and then try to make, thoughts about how prosecutors are coming to plea bargaining decisions using the data that was gathered by the Sentencing Commission, which wasn't gathered to talk about plea bargainings and what prosecutors use. So we did note that there seemed to be a misunderstanding of the day-to-day work of prosecutors in a lot of the research. There was a very negative tone about how prosecutors were spoken about in a lot of the research. This changed as we got into more current studies where there was more qualitative data collection, and we were sitting down and talking to prosecutors and gathering information about what they're doing on a daily basis and how they're coming to decision makings. But there was still a lot of research that had no involvement of any prosecutor's office, or I even spoke with the prosecutor to add any kind of context to the conclusions that were being made. And as I said, there was a big focus on potential racial and gender bias within decision-making, which are very important topics, and we are not saying that they're not. But there was very little context provided by prosecutors themselves. There was very little qualitative data collection. And we do think that that's hindering some of the research around prosecutors, this lack of cooperation between prosecutors' offices and researchers. And that is something that as we move forward, we are hoping to, bridge that gap a little bit. And we're hoping that, part of this project can actually increase the diversity in the empirical research surrounding prosecutors, and that we can help prosecutors, strengthen their capacity for internal data collection and to collect the type of data that researchers need to really focus on empirical research on prosecutorial decision-making. We did note that many of our topics had very little or no empirical research that we do think are very important for researchers to have more information about. And, specific things like Brady lists and overall transparency of prosecutors' offices, they just really weren't discussed in the empirical research that we found. We did find that there are common issues kind of pervasive throughout prosecutors' offices in terms of resources, caseloads, limited funding, lack of money for investigators within offices. And we also found that this also was prevalent in research around crime victims and how prosecutors interact with their local community and with the victims of crime. All of the research that we found that talked about victimization or interaction with victims, they all focused on domestic violence or intimate partner violence or sexual assault. We did not find any research that focused on other types of victims who prosecutors deal with on a regular basis, or how prosecutors are interacting with these victims. So our big recommendations, as we said, is that prosecutors are critically understudied. And as such a big role in the criminal justice system, we think that this is something that we need to help address. We do think that the lack of cooperation currently between prosecutors' offices and researchers is a cause of this. We do plan to help, hopefully, increase these relationships between researchers and prosecutors' offices to allow for us to increase the empirical rigor and also do more of a qualitative data collection, kind of going back to the beginning and speaking with prosecutors directly about what factors are going to go into their everyday decision making and how offices make decisions around charging or bail, for plea bargaining, and even for sentencing. And with that, I'm going to turn this back over to Alyssa to explain to you our future actions.
Thank you so much for the summary of what we've found and kind of where we're headed in the recommendations that we've made. So part of how we're collecting data, so to speak, is not only through the literature review that was done, but we're actually hoping to get ourselves into some of these offices to find out how it is that prosecutors are actually making decisions within the offices. So we're calling it targeted interviews with various prosecutors' offices. We're picking 5 to 10 jurisdictions to participate in these targeted interviews. And we're going to focus mainly around how prosecutors are making decisions relative to plea agreements, although we'll be talking about prosecutorial processes in general, but also how prosecutors' offices are addressing implicit bias. So we will be choosing these 5 to 10 sites based upon the legal systems that they have in place. There has to be a willingness to participate. So what that looks like is we will be kind of looking to get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on in the office. So we're looking at policies that they have in place, any training materials that they're rolling out to the prosecutors within their offices, any data that they are collecting, access to that data. And also they have to be willing to make their staff available for interviews as well. So we're obviously looking as always, to achieve diversity, not only in region, size, but the demographic composition of the community served as well. If you can please advance to the next slide. So how we will be collecting these materials, as I said, collecting the data is, as I said, through two means. The first is to collect any policies and training materials they have in place to analyze what it is that they have available. And then the second is to conduct interviews. So specifically, we would be looking at initial screening decisions, how those decisions are made, what that process looks like, pretrial release recommendations and decisions around that. Plea bargaining, is there a policy in place to talk about how prosecutors should be extending plea offers, and how do sentence recommendations or any statutory guidelines affect that? And then community engagement as it relates to policy and training. As you heard Jen talk about, and it was not surprising to me, but what the research has shown really is the value in having victim support throughout the process as it relates to the successful prosecution of cases. And ultimately, we can, take from that an effort toward violent crime reduction. So really trying to understand what policies and training materials exist within an office, and then conducting interviews with the staff within the office to see how they feel about the decisions that are being made and the policies in place. If we can please advance to the next slide. So after we kind of do a deep dive into the office's decision-making process, we will provide the site with a summary of the data that we collected. And then we will be using what we've collected from each of the sites to help provide the field with what we're going to hopefully determine to be effective strategies and resources based upon what we've found. So if you know any jurisdictions that may be a good fit, that may be willing to share information with us and allow us into their offices, my contact information is coming up here in a slide or two. I'd ask that you please reach out to us, and I'll give you also information about our website where we have an application to participate in the targeted interview process. If we can please advance to the next slide. Okay, so we're getting to the end here. So just a little summary of the PRC program. I know we've gone through a lot today, but essentially PRC is working to provide support to the field of prosecution. And as you heard, we're doing that in a number of different ways, but we're really hoping to gain a better understanding of how prosecutors are making decisions and what is impacting or affecting the decisions that are being made by prosecutors. We're also hoping to gain a better understanding of how data is being collected and whether data is being collected efficiently, and if not, making some recommendations on how we can do better in that regard. We want to learn the challenges that prosecutors' offices are facing and kind of bring that information into the forefront of the conversation, because it's important to talk about when we're talking about violent crime reduction efforts and prosecutorial efforts specifically, and then explore other considerations relative to effective violent crime reduction strategies, like we heard a little bit about today, that victim support and how important that is to a successful prosecution, and interagency collaboration, which is something I could go on and on about. I know I'm in good company with that here, but how agencies working together and collaborating really is a superior approach to violent crime reduction. And then the end goal is to really develop resources, best practices, and support the field in any way that we're able to. We're hoping to develop some written resources. We're hoping to implement some training webinars, and we're hoping to establish an actual collaboration between offices so that we can put an office in New Jersey in touch with an office in New Mexico that may be implementing similar policies so that everyone can talk and share an experience. If you can please go on to the next slide. And so this is where you can find us. The website is on the top there, the address. I also am very proud of myself. I created a QR code that y'all can use too. So that will get you access right to the website as well. You can see a little bit about our advisory board members, a little bit about the project. As I said, that is the area under technical assistance where you can put an application or send an office to put an application in to participate in the targeted interviews, and the resources that we develop, including this very comprehensive literature review that's been done. Those will all be placed on the website as well. If you do have any questions, you can reach out to me directly, and I will likely rope in the other team members to help answer the questions. But that's all that we have on PRC. So I just wanted to take the time to really thank you all for your attention, and thank you so much for allowing us to tell you about this project. And I just want to publicly thank CNA for their partnership and all the incredible work that we've been able to accomplish together so far in the project. So thank you all.
Thank you, Alyssa. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Kate. At this time, I'm going to open things up for questions. You can ask our crime analyst team or our PRC team, anything you'd like to at this time. We have about 15 minutes of open-ended questions here. I do have a question for Caitlin and Amanda, and that's going to be, have you observed a reluctance by command staff? They hire an analyst, they use the analyst a little bit, but then there's a reluctance either in a pocket of the department or overall in the department to effectively use or even try to utilize the analyst. They think it's a good idea, but then they're not really doing anything with it. Have you encountered that or see that as you talk to people or as you do your trainings?
So I would say that oftentimes we talk about this concept of a crime analysis black hole, where an analyst may be producing products that are not necessarily utilized and institutionalized within the agency. And a lot of the buy-in for crime analysis ultimately starts with executive leadership, and especially the chief or the sheriff over that organization. Caitlin and I have talked about this previously about how does an analyst encourage buy-in with an organization. And a lot of that comes from producing those products and having success. So for example, at the agency I worked with, I produced a pattern product that was able to isolate down to a particular day of the week and a certain time range for an apartment complex that was experiencing an additional theft from motor vehicles. At that time, the squad actually deployed and set up basically in the woods to kind of watch the parking lot. And the suspect actually did burglarize a variety of different vehicles during that time frame. And so that was able to encourage a lot of buy-in because they saw the success of the products and then began to kind of believe in the data-driven approaches at that time.
Fantastic. And then Alyssa, it struck me in terms of the jurisdictions you're looking for. Are you going to be looking, trying to balance it in terms of the size of the office? It's not just have some of your major offices, but smaller, maybe even rural offices.
Absolutely. I think it's really important for us to capture a complete picture of what we have going across the country. So, because as we all know, what may work for a larger office and the resources that a larger office have do not compare to those of a smaller office. So the goal is really to get a good range of what we see across the country. Sorry, my brain's a little fried right now. Good range of what we see across the country in the hopes of really capturing what offices are going through and making recommendations based upon those challenges like size and resource and all of that.
Thank you. Has NDA done any surveys in terms of just getting basic data from prosecutors' offices about the use of case management or prosecution use of data internally? Any outreach that way in the past decade or so that you know of?
So I know that we were very involved in the prosecutorial dashboard paper that went out, which did talk a little bit about prosecutorial dashboards. I'm not sure that we've collected data per se on the use of case management systems and things like that. Not to say it's not a project we wouldn't be interested in getting involved in, but prosecutorial dashboards, I don't know if you all are familiar with that paper that went out, but there are several prosecutors' offices that have been addressed in their use of dashboard. Obviously, that's an area that we want to bring more awareness around to as we hope to create transparency and build that trust with communities.
Fantastic. I see that one of our directors, Chip Coldren, has a question. Chip, I'll turn it over to you for a minute.
Thank you, Damon. I didn't know how to put a multi-tiered question in the chat, so please bear with me for a second, if you will. I'm going to start with Kate or Jen. Could you just restate the point that one of you made about seems to be a narrow focus of research relating to prosecutors and victims around, sexual abuse or assault or something like that? And if that's the point that you made, what's happening? What's driving the research that way? Might we find information about other topics in other sources? Is it being published elsewhere? Just, it just seems like that's a pretty darn narrow focus, given all the things we know about what's happening with victims in the justice system.
Sure, and Jen, I can jump in first and you can follow if that works okay. So that's, it's an interesting question, Chip, because that's growing out of a really specific set of circumstances, which is that there's been obviously a problem with victims of sexual assault, domestic violence, interpersonal violence, intimate partner violence, being reluctant to engage with prosecutors, to engage with the system at all, right? So whether that's through fear of subsequent victimization, or that the system is just inaccessible, right? So folks, especially victims of sexual assault, will find that the system is fairly impenetrable, right? And to be able to deal with prosecutors and that leg of the justice system in a way that's effective. So that was a problem that was really identified. And because of that, there's been a lot of research that sort of coalesced around that single point, whether it's how prosecutors can try cases without the participation of the victim, or how we increase victim services and outreach to facilitate the participation of the victim, right? And it's really growing from that hesitancy, that reluctancy, and there's a myriad bigger social processes that are contributing to that. But yeah, that's really why, and I think that's why you're not seeing you haven't seen a similar movement looking at other victims of crime, right? So it's definitely, there has been a fair amount of research that's coalesced around that single point. I think because there was that problem that was really readily identifiable, and it was causing clear problems in the justice system as far as being able to prosecute crimes. And that's just not a set of circumstances that we've seen replicated elsewhere for all of these other topics and subtopics, I think is probably what I'd say. And I'll kick it over to Jen to add her perspective as a former prosecutor as well.
Well, I think Kate did a great job answering that question. The only thing that I would add to it is I think also because in these types of crimes, intimate partner violence, domestic violence, sexual abuse, we're usually dealing with victims who know the perpetrator. And so because of that, there's more, and again, this is more speculation. This isn't something that we found in the research, but I think there's more use of victim services and victims advocates from the onset, just because of the nature of the crimes. And I think that's why we're seeing kind of when we're focusing on victims, we're focusing on these crimes.
Fantastic, thank you. Do we have any, oh, go ahead, Chip, you have follow up?
No, I'm just them for very, very pointed responses. Appreciate it.
Okay. Asking the other attendees if there's any other questions that you have. I do have one other one for our analyst team at their conference. And you mentioned talking about multiple jurisdictions and sharing data or sharing information over jurisdictions. Have there been the deployment of analysts in a regional setting? I know you kind of talked about the clearance centers or whatnot, but how does that work going across jurisdictions, and where have you seen positive outcomes from that?
Yeah. So I think that not to brag about New York just because that is my past, I think that New York has very much learned and is doing a really great job of, there are jurisdictions that have their own crime analysts that is not in a fusion center, and then there's analysts that are assigned to fusion centers, and there are analysts who are assigned to a city but also work in fusion centers. So there's really that cross collaboration of information sharing. And Amanda can speak more to some of the agencies that we work with. I keep disappearing, I apologize. In our program, because I really think that it differs in every place. It differs in more rural communities don't necessarily need an analyst to their own department, but the regional function can work for them. So it really just depends where you are. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so I would say that not only can you have analysts crossing over or supporting an entire region, but you also might have analysts with access to the data from other areas within a certain area. So with that, we have been working with an agency with the Crime Analyst in Residence program, where we were able to integrate multiple RMS systems from surrounding agencies together. Those surrounding agencies did not have analysts. So there's basically one analyst in that county that's able to access that data and then provide analytical products and disseminate those outward. So I think that there's both the staffing component to this, but also the data sharing initiative.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from any of our other attendees?
Damon, we did get a direct question,
Okay.
if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
So it was just about the difference between centralized and decentralized analytical units and who should the analyst report to. So in both of our experiences, it really depends on the agency and what the goals of the agency are, what from the chief, from the sheriff, what they want from their crime analyst. If they have multiple analysts, then they want it to be, let's say, for example, by crime type, their analysts to focus on that. They may have the analyst all in one area. If they want their analysts to be focused on districts, then it might make more sense for them to be out in the districts. So there is that visibility. Through both of our experiences, we've learned that the more visible you are as a crime analyst, the more that you're going to get done. So if you are assigned to a district, you need to be visible in that district with your patrol officers, with lieutenants, et cetera, in that district specifically. So it really depends on the department and what needs that they have.
I think it's also important to mention that you can also have a component that combines both of those together. So you may have analysts that are decentralized, but maybe they work together one day a week to learn from the other analysts within that unit. There is a concern that analysts become siloed or maybe given non-analytical tasks if they are stationed in a specific precinct. So there are sometimes a meet in the middle and you get the best of both worlds. It again just depends on the agency's needs.
Great. Your hand is up.
Yeah, thanks, Damon. I just wanted to pop in really quickly because Scott, it sent me a question directly that I think I can answer, but I'd also like to open it up a little bit. And he's asking, is there any reason to believe that AI can expedite crime analysis for jurisdictions that don't have a crime analyst? From my perspective, just looking at, I've been attached newly to kind of an endeavor that's potentially going to look at how something like ChatGPT can do qualitative analysis, right? And preliminary results are probably not very well, right? So that at least not, the kind of very specific iterative analysis that we want. So my inclination would be to say that this AI probably would not appropriately do crime analysis either. But I'd be interested to hear your guys' perspective on that for sure.
So my comment would be, I don't necessarily think that AI would be able to replace crime analysis. However, I do see it as being a resource for analysts, especially when it relates to formulas in Excel and Python with mapping and automation. Being able to access that as a resource and be able to quickly identify some of those technical specifications is something that analysts are already talking about. There's been a lot of talk this week. I've heard AI mentioned several times. So I'm definitely curious to kind of see how the field progresses.
Great. Thank you. Looks like Elliot has a question. Go ahead, Elliot.
I just actually wanted to follow up the last answer to say that the answer is probably not yet. I think at some point in the future, AI should be able to handle both the routine tasks that analysts do so that they can be freed up to do more complex tasks. And there are agencies that are talking about using AI and big data to do some really complex analyses. And I think it's starting, but only with a lot of really intense work by really, really senior smart analysts. So even in those cases, it's not, the AI isn't doing it, but the AI is learning what needs to be done to do it in the future and to do analyses off of data sets that we wouldn't even think of connecting yet. So it's there in the future, not yet.
Thank you, Elliot. I do not see any other questions either in the chat or with raised hands, so I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Cunningham.
I'll chime in here. We're just going to wrap up for this session. Yeah, Brittany's having some technical challenges. So thank you to Damon and our speakers. It was a nice segue in this last question around our AI into our next session, which will be on emerging technologies. So we will reconvene in about a little over 15 minutes at 3:15 Eastern. So thank you to our speakers again, and we'll be back in a few. Thank you.